My wife cheated with my best friend on a trip, sent me videos, and I got revenge with an affair, our shocking road to divorce. It's been 4 years to the month since this all went down. Back then, I was 36 years old, married to my wife, Chrissy, who was 35. We had been together for 15 years, married for 12, and we were living a pretty comfortable upper-middle-class life. We also had a 14-year-old daughter, Cora. I had two best friends from college, Eric and Mike. Eric, who was 34, was married to Emily, 30, while Mike, also 34, had finalized his divorce earlier that spring. Over the years, Chrissy and Emily had grown to be best friends as well, and the six of us, 3 couples, had started taking week-long summer vacations together. By the time this story began, we had been doing it for a few years. That summer, everything for the trip was set and ready to go when, 3 days before we were supposed to leave, I broke my ankle. It was a bad break. I wasn't allowed to put any weight on it for 16 weeks. On top of that, the medication I was on made me feel drowsy all the time. I didn't want to hold anyone back, so I made the decision to skip the trip. Chrissy offered to stay home with me multiple times, but I convinced her to go. Because of my injury and Mike's recent divorce, the trip ended up being just Chrissy, Eric, Emily, and Mike. What I now refer to as D-Day happened on December 7, 2019. Chrissy and Emily had planned a girls' shopping weekend about 2 hours away, staying overnight at a hotel. That Saturday night, everything unraveled. I'd sent Chrissy a Snapchat of our dog, and afterward, out of curiosity, I checked the Snap Map. That's when I noticed Mike's location. It was the exact same spot as Chrissy's. There was no good reason for Mike to be in that city. My stomach dropped. My mind raced to the worst conclusions, and I started calling and texting Chrissy like crazy. She ignored every single one. Thinking Emily might know something, I called Eric. I explained what I saw and told him I was ready to drive there to confront them. I asked if Emily had gone on the trip with Chrissy. In the saddest voice, he confirmed she had. He said Chrissy picked her up that morning and admitted that Mike was there too. For a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of relief, thinking maybe Mike and Emily were sneaking around, and Chrissy was just an unwitting cover. But then Eric dropped the bomb. "They're having a threesome," he said. I went numb, completely frozen. But Eric kept talking. "I'm sorry," he added. "This isn't the first time Chrissy's been with Mike. I've been with her too." The numbness vanished, replaced by pure, red-hot rage. I lost it, screaming, cursing, breaking a few things around the house. My daughter, Cora, came out of her room, terrified. She had never seen me like that before. Seeing her snapped me out of it. I pulled myself together, apologized, and reassured her that everything was fine. I lied and said I was just upset about work. I'm pretty sure she didn't believe me, but she went back to her room. Once I was alone again, I called Eric. He picked up immediately. "You better tell me everything," I demanded. Eric didn't hold back. He started with the vacation back in July. It had been a week-long trip, with 1 day on each end for travel. Day 1 was a relaxed, lazy day by the pool at the Airbnb. Things started going sideways on day 2. That morning, the group had planned an outing, just the 4 of them. Mike and Chrissy naturally paired up since Eric and Emily were a couple. It seemed harmless at first, just friendly. But as the day went on, they started getting a little too comfortable with each other. That night, they all had dinner at the Airbnb, followed by heavy drinking. Eric said it became obvious to Emily how flirty and close Chrissy and Mike were getting. Eventually, Eric and Emily went to their room, leaving Mike and Chrissy alone. About an hour later, Emily got curious and decided to check on them. She first went to Chrissy's room, but it was empty. Then she went to Mike's room and heard unmistakable sounds of 2 drunk people having sex. Emily went back to her room and told Eric what she'd heard. I interrupted Eric at this point, furious. How could Emily just let that happen? She saw them getting closer during dinner. Why didn't she step in and stop it? That's when the story took an even darker turn. Eric explained that he and Emily had been struggling in their marriage for a while. They'd been dealing with issues in the bedroom, and Emily had been pushing for an open relationship for months. Eric finally gave in but suggested they try swinging first. Their plan was to ask Chrissy and me to swing with them during the trip. But since I broke my ankle and didn't go, they thought the idea was dead. So, when Emily discovered Chrissy and Mike's drunken hookup, she saw it as an opportunity. The next morning, Emily talked to Chrissy about what happened. She said Chrissy was filled with guilt and terrified of being caught, especially since there were witnesses. But Emily downplayed it, telling her it wasn't a big deal. "You've been stressed out from work for months," Emily told her. "You're on vacation. No job, no Chuck, no Cora, you left it all behind for a week. Why stop now?" Eric told me that Emily even encouraged Chrissy to continue. She suggested it could be their free week. Emily promised to keep it a secret and said she and Eric would cover for them if anything came up. Chrissy was hesitant at first but eventually went to Mike to talk about it. Mike, in turn, approached Eric to confirm if they were really okay with this. Eric, coached by Emily, told Mike it was fine. And that's how it all began. The next few days went by, and I was barely holding it together. Eric told me that both Chrissy and Mike embraced the idea of this vacation from reality. They leaned into it completely, treating each other like a pair of love-struck teenagers. From what he described, they kept everything looking innocent in their social media posts and group snaps. Whenever Chrissy called me or sent a text, it felt normal, like everything was fine. I was home recovering, clueless about what was actually happening. Eric explained that during outings, they acted cautiously, no questionable photos or videos, but once back at the Airbnb, all restraint disappeared. He said it was blatantly obvious what they were doing. They were openly affectionate, constantly holding hands and sneaking kisses when they thought no one was watching. At night, Chrissy would always end up in Mike's bed, and they weren't exactly discreet about it. By the fourth night, they didn't even bother closing the door. The fifth day took things to an entirely new level. Emily, who had apparently been planning this from the start, convinced Chrissy to agree to a swap. Eric admitted he wasn't thrilled about the idea but felt cornered by Emily's persistence. She'd been pushing for an open relationship for months, and with the momentum from the trip, it seemed like there was no stopping her. That night, Chrissy and Eric were together while Emily spent the entire night with Mike. Eric said Chrissy went through the motions, but it was clear her heart wasn't in it. She left his room before morning, and as she passed Emily in the hall, she sarcastically muttered, "You owe me one." That was the day they all headed back home, silently agreeing to keep everything under wraps. I remember Chrissy coming back that evening, acting overjoyed to see me. At the time, I thought she was simply being attentive because she felt bad for leaving me behind while I was injured. Looking back, I realize it was classic love bombing, her way of overcompensating for the betrayal. She was extra sweet and caring for weeks after the trip, which, in hindsight, should have been a red flag. Eric told me that once they got back, Emily became obsessed with the idea of fully opening up their marriage. She refused to take no for an answer. Eric, feeling backed into a corner, set some ground rules: full access to everything, messages, conversations, and activities. He said he only agreed because he was planning to gather evidence for a future divorce. Emily resisted at first, but when Eric threatened to expose what had happened during the trip, she finally gave in. Eric then revealed something even more damning. He had collected messages between Chrissy and Emily, which showed that Emily had been encouraging Chrissy to continue her fling with Mike. Apparently, Emily and Mike had started their own affair months earlier. The text showed that Chrissy had initially resisted, claiming the vacation was a one-time thing, but over time, Emily's persistence wore her down. By then, Mike had also entered the conversation, and the three of them began planning ways to keep their trysts going. Eric admitted he had photos and even a recording of Chrissy and Mike together. He said Mike had sneakily recorded it during one of their encounters. It wasn't the best quality, but it clearly showed Chrissy's face and a distinctive tattoo of hers. I felt sick hearing this. Eric offered to send me all the evidence, and while I was grateful for the information, I told him he was a piece of garbage for his part in all of it. I made it clear that once this was over, I never wanted to hear from him again. When Chrissy got home that Sunday evening, I was ready for a confrontation. She walked in looking visibly nervous, like she already knew the truth had come out. Eric had left Emily a voicemail telling her everything, including that he was filing for divorce and wouldn't be there when she returned. I played it cool until our daughter went to bed, pretending everything was normal. Once we were alone, I asked Chrissy what she wanted. She immediately broke down in tears and tried to hug me, but I stepped back. She started apologizing, begging for forgiveness, but I cut her off. I told her I needed the truth, and if I caught her lying even once, I'd file for divorce immediately. I also made it clear that I had evidence and wouldn't let her get away with anything. When she finally spoke, she said she wanted to work things out and prove how sorry she was. I wasn't convinced but told her to explain herself. I asked why she cheated in the first place. She said it started on the trip. She felt relaxed for the first time in ages, and the drinks and atmosphere made her lower her guard. She claimed it was a one-time mistake, but when I pressed her about why she kept doing it, her answer was brutally honest: she wanted to. She admitted that Emily had influenced her, but she also said she justified it by thinking, "I've already done it once, so what's the difference now?" Then came the hardest part, hearing her describe what had happened. Chrissy started by telling me it was a when in Rome situation. She admitted some of the things she'd done with Mike were things she hadn't done with me in years. I asked her if she was unhappy in our relationship, and she said no. She claimed we had a good marriage but that she just wanted to feel wild and excited. Things between us had gotten somewhat monotonous, and the experience was exhilarating for her. She told me her original plan had been to reconnect with me in that way once she got home, but since I hadn't gone on the trip, she felt like the opportunity was gone. When the moment presented itself again with Mike, she let herself get swept up in it. Then I brought up the swapping. Chrissy admitted it was a huge mistake. Emily had brought up the idea on their last full day, saying it had been amazing for her and Eric and could be even better for Chrissy and Mike. Emily downplayed it, making it sound harmless. She argued that Chrissy wasn't giving up anything real, just one night with Mike, and only as a way of paying Emily back for covering for her. I asked why she planned the trio. Chrissy insisted she hadn't intended to cross any more lines and swore she wanted to focus on us going forward. But when she returned from the trip and saw how happy Emily seemed with her open lifestyle, Chrissy admitted to feeling jealous. She said Emily's freedom and confidence were intoxicating. When Emily started her affair with Mike, Chrissy realized what she was missing and couldn't stop thinking about him. She tried to resist when the trio idea came up but found herself drawn in. Eventually, she caved. She told me she'd never been in a trio and wanted to experience it, especially with Mike, who she described as really good. She said she thought she could get away with it and that it wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. When she asked how I found out, I refused to answer. Then I asked why she didn't come straight home once she knew I'd discovered the truth. Chrissy's response was brutally honest. What difference would it have made? Either way, you'd know. Whether I stayed and continued or came home early, the result is the same. I asked her if there was anything else I needed to know. She said no, she just wanted a chance to rebuild our trust and work toward reconciliation. I told her flat out that I couldn't do it. I was hurt, betrayed, and couldn't stand to look at her. I was filing for divorce. Update 3. The next morning, Chrissy was still home. Normally, she'd be out the door heading to the office, but she'd taken the day off. I had done the same. Once Cora was off to school, Chrissy started love-bombing me again. She apologized repeatedly, promised she would do whatever it took, and begged for forgiveness. She proposed full transparency. I'd have access to all her accounts, messages, and conversations. She'd cut Emily out of her life completely, go to individual and couples counseling, and answer any questions I had. I told her that those were things you do if you're trying to reconcile, but I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't want to be her warden, constantly checking up on her. She pleaded with me to give her 1 week, a trial period. She said if I still felt the same way by the next Monday, she'd sign the divorce papers without contest. Against my better judgment, I agreed. For the rest of the week, Chrissy pulled out all the stops, trying to show me she'd changed. She constantly showered me with affection and made repeated attempts to initiate intimacy, but I rejected her advances. By Thursday, I told her I was unmoved. I still planned to file for divorce on Monday. On Friday, Chrissy seemed determined to try one last thing. After dinner, she told me she had a solution to the imbalance her infidelity had caused. At first, I didn't understand, but then she came right out with it. She suggested we have a trio. I stared at her, stunned. I told her she'd already done far more than that. She responded, okay, then how about this, you can have a week off from the marriage. I pointed out how ridiculous that was. She, as a woman, could walk out the door and find a man within hours. For me, it would take far more effort, and I'd likely come up empty-handed. She countered with a new proposal. Fine, you can have 10 hall passes, no expiration. 10 times with whoever you want, and it can be the same person or different people. I asked if she was serious. Did she really think this wouldn't destroy what was left of our marriage? She promised she wouldn't let it affect our sex life. She'd put in extra effort to meet my needs and would be open to any fantasies I wanted to explore. I told her I needed time to think about it. Looking back now, I realize my next decision was a sleazy one. I should have walked away, filed for divorce, and started fresh. But I didn't. In my mind, I justified staying as a way to get something out of all this pain. Here was an offer to explore fantasies, to have a trio, and to cash in on these hall passes. I told myself I could accept her deal, use it as a form of revenge, and then leave her when it was all over. It felt like justice at the time. But deep down, I knew I was just letting the betrayal twist me into something I never wanted to become. I agreed to Chrissy's proposal, but I had conditions. I told her I wanted the trio to happen soon, no later than February 1st. I made it clear that if she couldn't make it happen by then, I'd take it as proof she wasn't serious and had only made the offer to buy herself more time. To my surprise, she made it happen fast. Between Christmas and New Year's, she showed me a picture of a woman from her spin class, a stunning 25-year-old named Tiffany. I couldn't believe it. Tiffany was gorgeous, and I was stunned Chrissy had found someone so quickly. I asked how she managed to convince her, but Chrissy just smiled and said, "I have my ways." My guess? She offered her money. 2 weeks later, the big night arrived. What I did next, looking back, was both spiteful and calculated. I decided to do something different from what most men in my position might have done. Instead of focusing all my attention on Tiffany and sidelining Chrissy, I made Chrissy the center of the night. I'd read enough stories online to know that in trios, especially male-female ones, the wife or girlfriend can often feel left out if her partner focuses too much on the new woman. I wanted to flip the script. I made sure Chrissy felt included, complimented her, talked to her, and paid her extra attention throughout the night. Of course, I had my fun with Tiffany, but I made sure Chrissy felt like she was part of it all. And it worked. Afterward, Chrissy told me she'd only done it to win me back, but that the experience was amazing. She said it made her feel closer to me and that she couldn't believe how much it had strengthened her feelings for us. In the weeks that followed, she became more enthusiastic in the bedroom, trying new things and making an effort to reconnect with me. I suspected she hoped this would make me forget about the hall passes and give our marriage a real chance. Update 4. By mid-February, I decided to use my first hall pass. There was a 27-year-old restaurant manager, Sabrina, who worked at a spot near my office. I'd been a regular there for years and always thought she might be a little flirty with me. When I finally asked her out, I lied. I told her I was 2 months into a divorce and that, while Chrissy and I were still living in the same house, I'd moved into the basement. It wasn't true, but it made things simpler. Sabrina seemed hesitant at first but eventually agreed. Later, I asked what made her say yes, and she said she'd noticed the first time I came into the restaurant without my wedding ring. I'd taken it off on D-Day, and by then, the tan line was nearly gone. To her, that meant I wasn't just taking it off to meet women but had truly moved on. Not long after, the COVID shutdowns hit. The world seemed to grind to a halt, and I used the chaos as an excuse to keep stalling on marriage counseling. Chrissy kept bringing it up, but I kept delaying, first saying I'd wait until after the trio, then until I'd gone on a date, and finally blaming the shutdowns entirely. By April, I'd seen Sabrina 7 times. We went on 2 actual dates before the shutdowns and then started spending time at her apartment since she lived alone. Our relationship became physical, and by that point, I was done pretending to reconcile with Chrissy. One day, I sat her down and told her the truth, it wasn't working, and I still wanted a divorce. This time, she didn't fight me. She looked sad, defeated even, but she accepted it. I found a small 2-bedroom house and moved out, leaving Chrissy in the family home. The one decent thing I did during all of this was sit Cora down and tell her everything. I told her the full story, her mom's infidelity, my spiteful behavior afterward, and how deeply we'd wronged each other. I wanted her to understand that we both loved her and wanted the best for her, even if we had failed each other. The 3 of us agreed on a 50-50 custody arrangement, alternating weeks. By January 2021, the divorce was finalized. I stayed with Sabrina throughout the process. Cora got along with her fine, they were friendly but never developed a step-parent relationship. Sabrina and I ended things in January of this year. She wanted marriage and kids, and I couldn't give her that. Chrissy, meanwhile, had a few short relationships. The longest lasted 11 months, but nothing ever seemed to stick. Then something unexpected happened. Chrissy and I had co-parented effectively since the divorce. We both made it a priority to show up for Cora's events and milestones. This past May, at Cora's high school graduation, we ended up sitting next to each other. What should have been awkward wasn't. We started talking, joking, even flirting a little. It felt natural. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I called Chrissy and asked her out. She flat out said no. I was ready to hang up when, after a long pause, she added, "Unless we go to marriage counseling." I agreed. We had our first session on a Thursday and our second first date on Friday. Now, 6 months later, we're still in counseling. This time, we chose a therapist who specializes in ENM, ethical non-monogamy, because that's something we both want to explore together. We've even started talking about me moving back into the family home. Cora, now in college, thinks the whole thing is weird. When she came home after her first semester, she told me she didn't know whether to be happy or worried about us getting back together. One thing she made very clear, she doesn't want to hear any details about our arrangement. As for everyone else, Eric divorced Emily and moved 4 states away. Mike and Emily tried to make a real relationship work after her divorce, but it didn't last. They realized the only thing they really had in common was sex. Emily eventually remarried a former co-worker of Eric's and moved when he got promoted. Ironically, her new husband is now Eric's boss and has been blocking Eric's transfer requests. That bit of karma still makes me laugh. Mike, who I not so affectionately call Mother **** or Mike, is still single. I wish him nothing but the worst. Oh, and for the record, Chrissy paid Tiffany $250 for the trio. That's my story. Maybe one day, I'll have a real happy ending update. For now, though, I'm just taking it one day at a time. Happy holidays.